as therapists, as clinicians, we want our patients to do well. So, when we have those little outbursts, it's not because like we're mad at you we're mad at the patient for not getting it. It's just we want to see you do well, and it's something that may seem insignificant to us that's very significant to you, and we have to help you work through it. It happens.
You're listening to the Recovered Life Show, the show that helps people in recovery live their best recovered lives. And here is your host, Damon Frank.
Welcome to the Recovered Life Show. I am pleased to be joined today with Dan Greenberger. Dan is a Long Island social worker that helps people suffer from addiction. Dan also created a podcast called The Sober Highway. Its focus is really about reducing the stigma of addiction, and it chronicles his experiences as a clinician helping people get and stay sober. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Thank you for having me, Damon. It's a pleasure to be here.
So great to have you. I was excited about this episode because we usually talk about people that have already gone through sobriety or have entered into sobriety or made that decision. And a lot of it's an independent decision, right? And you work within the system, the legal courts, the hospitals, and rarely do we talk about, being court mandated or what the differences are of coming into recovery through some sort of organized government structure or hospital or some sort of state intervention. And I know that that's what you do. And I love your podcast, which really focuses on reducing the stigma of that. And I think we just want to kind of start with just, asking you about your experience, how you kind of got started in being a clinician and kind of the differences of entering into recovery through some sort of court mandate or system.
Okay, well, first, I guess I'll start with how I decided to become a clinician. When I was growing up, I had a lot of opportunities working with children on the autism spectrum. So originally, when I first decided to get into social work, I wanted to work with kids on the autism spectrum. And when I got to graduate school, they basically told me that they don't have like a set track for that type of social work. The closest thing that they could offer to me was, working with people with addictions, alcohol and drug treatment. So I was like, all right, I'll give that a try. And, my first internship was literally like walking distance from my house. So, I learned a lot there. That was actually a state-run facility. And then my second internship was at, an outpatient clinic, I don't want to say privately owned, but it's a community outpatient clinic. And that was where I really, fell in love with this type of work. And that was when I decided that this is what I want to do for the rest of my career.
What did you find appealing about working with people in recovery?
Well, I like the fact that, I get to play a role, however small it may be, in helping someone, do a complete 180, if you will, and, make a change and, start living a healthy life. And if, when I see those, when I see someone complete treatment and I see like all of the amazing things that they've earned through their recovery, knowing that I played a small little part in that makes me feel so good. So I guess I do it maybe for selfish reasons. I don't know. But I guess it's a good thing to do for selfish reasons.
Well, they always say working in recovery, if you're a transformation junkie, working in recovery is great because you get to see people fully transform. And, sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes it's you see the transformation fairly quickly, but it is kind of addictive, if you will, right? Being able to see people come in and have such issues and then be able to come out and live a normal life.
Absolutely.
So by the time you see people, they've already made it somewhat into the system. They've either come into an ER, they're in the court system, they've been court mandated. How's that different from somebody who just wakes up one day and says, you know what, I've had enough of drinking, I've had enough of drug use, I'm gonna get sober? Is there a difference?
Well, I mean, at different levels of care, you'll see people come into treatment for different reasons. I mean, like when I was working at the outpatient program, we would get people that would just call the office and say, "Hey, like exactly what you were saying. Like, I decided I don't want to drink anymore. I don't want to get high anymore. I Googled, outpatient programs in my area. I found you guys. Can I come in and talk to someone?" And they're just there to feel things out, which is great because I get to show them everything that we had as a program to offer. And, I ask them a whole bunch of questions about their life, and, they get to decide, is this something that they want to do? We would also get the people that said, oh, I just got arrested for DUI. The judge told me I need to get into a program. Is this the type of program I'm supposed to be in? Then you get people that are on probation. You get people that are on parole. But for the most part, at the hospital, the type of patients that we get are usually just they're brought in by by the ambulance, or they walk in and they're just they're very intoxicated, or they're very much under the influence of some sort of substance, and they're usually homeless. They don't have ID on them, so it takes a while to figure out who they are, if they have a record in our health system, find out what substances they were using. So it's a little bit different, but once a person has sobered up, if you will, and we can have a nice conversation with them, the things that I learn are amazing. So you may get every once in a while someone that just says, you know what, I've just had enough. Like, they're like, holy crap, I'm in the hospital? Like, I never thought I would end up in a hospital. So, I think it really depends on what level of care you're working at.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I assume too that you're seeing people, especially in the hospital, it's probably one of the worst days of their life, right? So you're not coming in one of their more memorable using days, right? You're coming in when things have totally fallen apart. What do you feel? Working in the system, working in the hospital, there's a lot of people that are in the medical field that really, in my opinion, not everybody. I'm just going to say this up front, but not everybody. But a lot of doctors and people that are in medicine have really inaccurate views about addiction, really wrong information, I found. What do you think some of the frustrating things are that by the time people make it into the courts or make it into a hospital, that you find the biggest miss that people have in the medical business about people that are suffering from addiction?
Well, I will say that a lot of the doctors that are in the emergency room now, especially given the area of Manhattan that we're in, they're very well aware of, what addiction is and like how to treat people that present with those types of issues. So, but they're not addiction specialists. I mean, I don't even know if I would call myself an addiction specialist, but like, when someone comes in that has addiction issues, or say they're in withdrawal, they'll, obviously the doctor's going to medicate them for the withdrawal symptoms, but when it comes to like treatment and talking to them about that type of stuff, they usually defer to me, which is pretty cool because they trust my opinion as a professional. As far as myths, I mean, you mean myths that doctors and like nurses believe, or like that the general public believes?
I think also the general public too. But I found that, a lot of, I've heard doctors say, well, it's not really a medical issue. It's really a willpower issue. If they really wanted to quit, they could quit. Or this person's really, it's really just a general attitude issue. and they need to grow up. And if they grow up a little bit, I've heard a lot from doctors and people that really have just no experience with addiction treatment at all, and they're thrown in on a medical side, and they're kind of baffled, honestly, by it.
Well, I think also, like I was saying before, we have a lot of the patients that we get that come in intoxicated are homeless. They literally have nothing except for the clothes on their back and maybe like a bag of stuff. I call it stuff because I never know what's in these bags. But I think they see it so often that they've become desensitized to it, and they get frustrated and they say things that they don't mean. And, when you really think about it, if you really want to start someone off on the recovery process the right way, it doesn't start directly from the hospital. I mean, it helps, but like if someone's homeless, they don't have a cell phone, they don't have clean clothes, they don't have a place to sleep, they don't have food to eat, they don't have all these things, you can't possibly expect someone to remain sober. It's impossible.
Yeah, I would think that is, an impossible situation. Obviously, people do, though, right? Because we've each, we've I'm sure both met people who have been in terrible situations, homelessness, not even having enough to eat day to day, really bad medical situation on top of, trying to stay sober and right? So obviously it's possible, but it's much harder. Right. Absolutely. If you have those issues, and you're kind of seeing that day to day, do you feel that like, addiction really is early addiction really is about being trapped, right? So it's like them feeling that they really have no other choice but to use by the time that they've, reached you. What are some of the things that you found that work well with people that have reached this level, that have decided that, now I'm going to decide to make a change? Do you feel that by the time it's gotten to that point where there's homelessness and huge medical issues, that it's really difficult to do this, or is it possible?
It's definitely possible. One of the things that I think is the most important when you meet with this population is they come up with a bunch of excuses why they don't want to go. So why they don't want to go to treatment or get sober. So you want to help them break down those barriers and be like, okay, well, that's not really a reason why I shouldn't be going to treatment. One of the things is, how am I going to get there? So a lot of the programs that we refer to, especially the detox and the residential programs that we refer to, they will come pick the patient up from the hospital. Like, if I start, like this past Sunday, yesterday, I started my shift at 7 a.m. Someone came in at 9 o'clock in the morning. They said they wanted to go to treatment. They wanted detox. I was on the phone with that rehab at 9:30. That patient was in the van on the way to rehab by 11 o'clock.
Wow.
So, once they get to rehab, there's the saying, discharge begins at admission. So once they get into treatment, once they get into that rehab, there's a whole like a litany of staff that are going to meet with this person that each provides a different service. Like they're going to help, one person's going to help them find housing. One person's going to help them find a job, going to help them apply for food stamps, apply for health insurance, things like that. So when they're done with rehab and they get out, they have all these amazing things going for them and they have a strong base to work off of.
Yeah. On the Recovered Life Show, we talk with a lot of people, and I have a lot of personal friends who have, had gone through homelessness in their addiction and made it out and have created these amazing lives. But I think that there's an overwhelming kind of sense now or feeling from people that it's so out of control, that addiction is so out of control, that the homeless population has such a large number of people that are suffering from addiction that it's almost impossible right, to get people help and to be able to transition them into a life where they can make changes and decisions to live a recovered life. So it's good to hear that it's possible. You know, do you find that most of the people that you work with get it the first time, the second time, the third time? What does it usually take in your opinion?
Sometimes, I mean, some people are lucky enough to get it on the first time. Some people it takes, 2, 3, there could be an infinite number of chances that someone has to have before they realize that they need to get their act together. And this is one of the very few times that I get to have like a kind of a condescending attitude, and they say, oh, I've been through this and that didn't work. I tried this and that didn't work. You know what I mean? And I'll just say, okay, well, you tried all of this stuff and you got the same result every single time. So what have you learned? And they're like, I don't know. What have I learned? And I'm like, well, you've done the same thing over and over and over again, and you haven't, and you keep failing. Mm-hmm. So maybe it's time to change your behavior, and once they have that breakthrough that, oh crap, I really need to change up my game, that's when the real work starts.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think a lot of people, I had someone that I knew very well said, who was homeless for 10 years actually, and living on the streets of LA, told me that, when he actually firmly made a decision that things were going to change for him, things did change for him, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a misconception when you're working with people who are trying to get sober or trying to make a decision to get sober. If they've made a firm decision, rarely can you stand in their way of getting sober, right? It's not really the resources, although the resources help. You have to have a place to stay, you have to have food to eat, right? You have to have basic medical care. But really, it's community that helps get people stay and to stay sober long term, right? It Absolutely. Gives them the opportunity to stay sober long term. How do you introduce the topic of, hey, you're going to have to be able to let go, you're going to have to work with others, you're going to have to be part of a community, and you have to start looking kind of, although you're doing this a day at a time, you have to start looking at this long term, right? Which probably who you're dealing with at the time is going through crisis. They don't necessarily want to hear that. How do you deliver that message to them in their most vulnerable time in their life, probably?
That is a loaded question. I'm going to try my best to answer it.
It is a loaded question.
I always try to encourage people to think as far into the future that they feel comfortable. So for some people, one day at a time is too much for them, and it's crazy to think about that because, like, maybe you and I could probably think like months, even years into the future, and it doesn't really overwhelm us that much. And if it does, we can kind of cope with that and bring ourselves back to the present. But some people can't even think a day in advance because they don't even know where their next meal is coming from. They don't know where they're going to sleep. So, think as far ahead as you feel comfortable. And, when you talk about having to work with others, I get that all the time. Patients come in and they say, especially at the outpatient program, they're like, well, what does this program entail really? And I'm like, well, there's individual therapy, there's group mm-hmm. therapy, we have a psychiatric staff, we have a psychiatrist, an NP, and all that. If you want to explore medication, and they're like, oh no, I don't want to work in groups. I kind of just want to do the solo thing for now. Mm-hmm. And the way I see it is, some treatment is better than nothing. especially at the beginning. So if I can get someone in with individual therapy first, we can explore group therapy a little bit further down the road. And one of the things I encourage people to think about with group therapy is to use it in conjunction with your individual sessions with your counselor. A lot of the times, when I was working at this program, the groups I was running just so happened to be like the majority of the people in that group were the patients that I was meeting with individually. So what I would do is I would say, take what we're learning in individual sessions, what we're talking about, bring it to group and talk and say like, hey, this is something I'm working on in my individual sessions, and this is something I've learned. Have any of you guys experienced this? Maybe you can offer me some feedback and whatnot. And we have a general discussion. And then they take that stuff from group, they go out into the community, they try to implement something that they want to try, and then they bring it back to an individual and they say, okay, well, we talked, you remember when so-and-so said this in group? Well, I went out, I tried that didn't work, so what do I do now? And we'll kind of go over it with a fine-tooth comb saying, well, did you really implement everything that person said, or did you not? Maybe we can fine-tune it to make it specific to you, and maybe that will work. So it's kind of like using individual and group therapy synergistically. Is that a word?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If it's not, I just made it a word. But
it's a word.
They'll see the potential benefit of going to group therapy, and then they'll go for the first time and they'll really enjoy it. So when people don't want to work with groups, with group therapy from the get-go, that's fine. But as far as working with others in general, like I try to tell people, like if you're against talking about your feelings, you're going to have a tough time. You're going to have a really tough time. You can do it. It's just going to be very, very difficult.
Yeah, because we know that community is a huge factor, right? If you have a strong community of people that you relate to at any stage of recovery, right? Having a strong community is super important. And, without that, I think it's frustrating. It's an uphill climb. And really being able to relate to other people, being able to have conversations with people, being able to have relationships with other people on an even ground is so important. I know there's a lot of people that are thinking about this, watching this podcast, or listening to this podcast, or watching this on YouTube, that said, "Man, what Dan does, there's no way I could do this because it's just too sad." Right? Like, I'm sure you have family or friends that have said this too. It's like, how do you personally deal with this? Because, look, you get more probably strikeouts than you get home runs. Let's be honest, right? Mm-hmm. Because the odds of, especially where you're at, high risk people, where there is, not like necessarily a soccer mom that wants to get sober, and let's say that they make several attempts and that doesn't happen. They're not necessarily homeless, in the courts, in jail, right? Major ramifications. You're dealing with things that have huge ramifications. How do you deal with this personally? Having this experience of seeing a lot of sadness.
Well, at the outpatient program, I was working with a lot more, I guess you could say, higher functioning adults. Like they owned homes. They had, a lot of them were married, have children, have stable jobs and stuff like that. So, in principle, I see failure a lot. And one of the things I had to struggle to accept was that they're not failing because I'm a bad counselor. They're failing because of something else. And it's up to me to help them figure that shit out. I'm sorry for cursing. Mm-hmm. It's up to me to help them figure it out. And as soon as I accepted that, the job became so much easier. There are some things that make it difficult on the day-to-day, especially like when I was working at the outpatient program, I found myself taking work home a lot. Like if I didn't finish notes, I had to take them home and do them at home and then bring them to work the next day. And that was difficult for me because there were a lot of times where I would come home and I'd want to, hop on the Xbox and play some video games or, watch a movie with my girlfriend or whatnot. And I can't because I have so many notes that I have to finish. And that kind of leads to, that's one of the reasons why social workers are one of the highest rates of burnout among all of the major healthcare worker professions. But one of the things I love about the job that I have now is that I don't have to take my work home with me ever. I never have to take it home because there's always someone to relieve me when I leave, like when my shift is over. So if there's ever anything that I can't finish because my shift is over, I'll go to the other social worker and I'll say, hey, this is, you have this case, and this case. Here's where I'm at with each one. This is all you need to do to get them out of the building. Mm-hmm. So that's great. And I think it's really done wonders for my mental health because when you go from a job where you're constantly feeling burned out to a job where you're not feeling burned out and you actually feel somewhat fulfilled when you leave work every day, it's exhilarating.
Well, I think, too, it's like if anybody has worked in 12-step groups or as a sponsor or, through a church or any kind of organization, they understand that, it's not you personally that has had that setback and that you are just trying to be of service, doing the best that you can. But it's up to each individual person on what they're going to actually do and not do. It's their own personal choice. It's not your personal choice. And that there's different paths for different people and that you don't necessarily, it's not your choice. Mm-hmm. It's not your choice. You can just give, be of service, and it's a lot of it is up to what they want to do.
I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, there have been a couple times where like I'll have a session with a client and, when you've been working with a particular patient for so long, they get to know a lot of the staff in the program. So like other counselors will walk by and they'll say, hey, what's going on? And, there have been times where I've had a patient that I've been working with for months and they, we had a good session, but like they're just hanging on to this one thing, one thing that they're struggling to cope with. And if they could just get past that, they could be doing a lot better. And they'll walk out of my office. I'll see them leave the building and I'll just walk into one of my coworkers' office and I'm like, if this guy could just get past this one freaking thing, he'd be fine, but he can't. And it's annoying. We don't ever show that side. We don't ever show that side of the coin, if you will. But it's important to know that we, as therapists, as clinicians, we want our patients to do well. So, when we have those little outbursts, it's not because like we're mad at you we're mad at the patient for not getting it. It's just we want to see you do well, and it's something that may seem insignificant to us that's very significant to you, and we have to help you work through it. It happens, but I don't know. I lost my train of thought. I think
you said it great because I think a lot of times, people that have gone through this process think that therapists and clinicians are just a stone wall, right? That they have no emotion about whether the patient gets it, doesn't get it. But what you're saying is behind the scenes, that's not the case.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of patients where we just had really gut-wrenching sessions where I remember this was really messed up. One time I had a patient that just shared all this stuff with me, and I was the first thing I thought to myself when I first heard all this, I was like, oh my God, like you should be able to use as many drugs as you want, because I don't know how anyone could possibly cope with all of that. But obviously you can't say that to a patient. But we were able to make it through that session, and the person actually felt somewhat empowered by the time they left my office. And to see someone completely do that 180 of emotion from when they walk in to when they leave is amazing. But to sit there and endure that, it was really, really difficult for me. So, I walked out of my office and I took like a couple laps around the block just to clear my head. And my boss comes back, like she sees me walk in and she's like, "Where did you go?" I was like, "Oh, I had to take a walk." And she goes, "Well, you can't just leave your office, like you're working." And when I walked into her office and I told her about everything that this person had shared with me during their session, she was like, "Oh, you take all the time you need." So we experience emotion just like everybody else. The only issue is we're not obligated to disclose that in the middle of a session, because then it becomes our therapy session, not yours.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I urge my colleagues to do, my fellow therapists, my fellow clinicians, doctors, nurses, and whatever, you can't be a good clinician unless you've been to therapy. Like, the best therapists are in therapy as well. The best psychiatrists have their own psychiatrists. And some people may think I'm joking, but it could not be more true.
Yeah, I know, we've talked a lot about all the negative things that you see. What's some of the amazing things that you've experienced? Because not that many people have a front row seat like you do. What are some of the amazing transformations that you've seen doing this work?
Okay, so there was a young guy that I worked with. He came in through felony treatment court, which on Long Island, basically, whenever someone gets arrested for like a low-level drug charge or low-level felony, they sign a contract with the court, which basically mandates them to treatment for 18 months. And at the beginning of the contract, you're required to go 3 days a week. And then over time, it reduces from 3 to 2 to 1. And so this guy came in with what he thought was a bogus felony charge. And, I slowly got to see him I slowly got to see his thought process transform to the point from where he went to like, this is completely bogus, to like, maybe I do have a problem. Okay, I have a problem. I'm starting to think about, changing up my act. And by the time I got him to the point where his 18-month mandate was completed, he had improved his relationship with his parents. He got a better job, making more money. He was working on the process of moving out of his parents' home. And so, for a young adult, these are some amazing things. So when I got to see him do all of that, it was like, this makes me feel really good to watch someone do all that. When I was working with the adolescents, it's a completely different ballgame, because you have, not only are you working with the child, because they are children, you're working with their parents as well. And so when you see the child or that kid doing all the work, and then their parents start to see an improvement in their child, so they buy into what the program is selling, and you see the family heal as a whole, you're like, holy crap, like, this is insane. Like, this is amazing work that everyone's doing. And, it's a shame that at some point down the road, this kid's going to complete treatment and I'm not going to be able to see him anymore. There have been times where, like, I didn't want to complete someone because I genuinely enjoyed talking to them and seeing how well they're doing. But, people gotta move on and live their lives, because that's just what we do as humans. we evolve.
Dan,
we
where
get
can they
better.
find out more about you and your podcast?
So you can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, all the major social media platforms. If you want, what I'll do is I will send you my link tree. So if you want to put my link tree in the YouTube
Absolutely,
episode or whatever.
We'll definitely put that in the show notes.
Mm-hmm.
And they can also find your podcast, correct? And tell us a
Yes.
little bit about what you talk about on your podcast.
So I do this Sober Highway podcast with a friend of mine, Anika Merchants. She's a social worker on Long Island as well, and we basically share our experiences working with people that struggle with addiction. We talk about different topics related to addiction, and our ultimate goal is to educate the lay person about addiction, what it means to be in recovery, and hopefully change some people's perspectives on what addiction is, because I think we talked about it in the first couple of episodes that when you ask someone who's never heard of addiction or never knew someone that was an addict, if you ask them what they think an addict looks like, they would probably paint a very negative picture, because they only go off of what they see in the news or the movies or on TV. And people in recovery are just like, they're people. They should be afforded the same opportunities that people that are not in recovery have. Like that, the way I see it is, labels are for clothes, not people. And as soon as people get that through their thick heads, then, society, the way that society sees addiction will improve. And
Totally agreed.
That's really what we're trying to do.
Dan Greenberger, thank you so much for coming on the Recovered Life Show. We're going to put all of the ways that you can connect with Dan in the show notes. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Keep the conversation going. Join Recovered Life, a community of like-minded people who are looking to live their best recovered lives. Membership is free, and you can apply at recoveredlife.us.